Luis Franco, Director of Admissions, University of North Texas at Dallas.
Laura?
Laura Isdell, Lone Star College.
Mardell?
Hello, everyone. This is Mardell Maxwell, Executive Director of Admissions at the University of Houston.
Thank you. Tristan? Okay, Tristan is running late and he'll be joining us later. Stephanie?
Hi, good morning. Stephanie Salazar, Assistant Director of Admissions at Del Mar College.
Thank you. Julia?
Julia Vickery, Vice President of Student Services, Midland College.
Michelle?
Michelle Walker, Director of Admissions Operations, Texas A&M University.
Miguel?
Miguel Vasilevsky, Executive Director of Admissions, UT Austin.
Thank you all. Rebecca Lothringer won't be joining us today. She had another commitment, but I think that, and we also have a couple of others that are joining us today who are filling in for positions for those that have transferred off of the committee. So I believe we have Veronica Lopez.
Hello, Veronica Lopez. I'm Associate Director of Admissions at the University of Houston, Victoria.
And Jennifer Waits.
Good morning. Jennifer Waits, District Registrar.
I'm sorry, Jennifer, it was hard to hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's better.
Sorry. Jennifer Waits, District Registrar for Cullen College.
Thank you both, and both of their positions will be approved by the board at the next board meeting. Okay. So at this time, please record in the minutes that we do have a quorum. Since we have committee members by phone and in person, we will review some meeting guidelines to help us manage the meeting for today. So just a few things to keep in mind. This meeting is an open meeting. It is being broadcast for the public and it is being recorded for later viewing. We ask that members in person to please mute your microphone in front of you when not speaking. If you see a red indicator, your mic is live and will be recorded. Those joining us by phone, be sure to mute your phones when not speaking. Please be aware that if you take a call and put the call on hold, we may hear any music or recording from your institution, and we will have to wait until we can return. So we ask that you please do not put us on hold. Also, a quorum has been established via roll call. To manage the committee discussion via conference call, please identify yourself prior to speaking for the record. We ask that you wait for one person to finish before speaking. Otherwise, comments may be muddled or unclear. Should the conversation become unmanageable, which we don't think that it will by any means, but please email Claudette directly and she will inform the committee that you'd like to speak. We will only use this process if needed, and we appreciate your willingness to be respectful of others and your flexibility. For this meeting, any motions will be voted on by roll call so we can capture votes. At the end of the meeting, please be aware that the meeting is still being recorded. Upon adjournment, we ask that you keep comments limited so that staff can stop the recording. The coordinating board staff will monitor emails at the email address listed on the slides and will address questions related to the agenda items. Before we get started, I'd also like to introduce a few other guests that are joining us today. We'd like to welcome Laura Brennan, the Deputy Assistant Commissioner for College and Career Advising, as well as Jarrell Booker, Assistant Commissioner of College Readiness and Success with the Coordinating Board. Laura, would you like to say a few words?
I just wanted to say thank you. I'm really excited to be here and meet all of you today, so it's nice to see you in person. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Laura. Are there any questions before we move to the next item? Okay, hearing none, we'll be moving to agenda item number 2.
Okay. Agenda item number 2 is overview of ApplyTexas committee task. Claudette will provide a brief overview of the ApplyTexas committee members' roles and responsibilities. Claudette.
Thank you, Chantel. So you all should have received in your packet or your meeting materials a few items. One of those was going to be an orientation booklet or orientation packet. In that orientation packet, I wanted to draw your attention to a couple of things that will set the stage for your work as a committee through the rest of the year. On page 2 of that orientation packet, and for those of you in person, it's this document that just starts out with ApplyTexas system at the front. At the very top, it'll outline all of the authorization or the rules regarding both the application system as a whole, your role on the committee, as well as any rules related to policy changes. So it's good for you to review these so that you know what your roles and responsibilities are, and I'm going to go over that here shortly. The task, really the purpose of the ApplyTexas Advisory Committee is to discuss and vote on different changes that may be needed to the applications, of all the different applications in the system. The committee also addresses any additional initiatives to strengthen the application system as a whole. The ApplyTexas Advisory Committee tasks are to review and look at technical and functional revisions that are needed for the common admission application and the system as a whole, the development of training materials or discussion of training needs for the application system. There's also a task may include recommendations on admission policy, and the other is any other activities necessary for maintenance of the ApplyTexas system. So that is what your role as a committee member is. Some other important things to note is there's in your pamphlet, there's also explanations on operating expenses and how the different how the actual application is funded from the state. There are rules that guide everything, so it's important for you to review those rules as well. On page 3, I want to draw your attention to the major ApplyTexas events that happen through the year to give you a flow of what happens. So today's meeting is really going to be an introductory meeting for the year. There are a number of things that were discussed during the last advisory committee that will be brought back to this advisory committee for consideration and improving the application system as well. And then there's going to be any additional considerations or recommendations that came in since that time. So that's what you'll be reviewing today. At that point, you'll kind of just hear all the different requests, and typically you vote on those requests and prioritize them. You consider them and prioritize them. Today we'll be going over just the whole list to see what all of the things that were carried forward from last cycle and the new considerations for this cycle. So that's what today's meeting will be. Throughout the year, so it'll be usually September, October, we normally have this meeting to do the introductions for the rest of the year, and then we'll have other meetings. This committee is only really required to meet 2 times per rule, but we typically meet, or you all typically meet 3 to 4 times, or as necessary. So we found that 3 to 4 times is a good number, and that's really up to you as a committee to decide that schedule. The other thing is, so we'll be meeting possibly again in February, April. You all meet again April, May, just depends on schedules. And then in July, there's usually a conference or a training that happens. So that's pretty much the basic year at a high level. And then, of course, 4 through the rest of the document are all the rules that are guiding both the application system, your role as a committee, and the any policy changes. So I just wanted to kind of quickly review those with you. Do you have any questions about your role as a committee member? Okay. Anyone on the call that has any question about this? All right, hearing none, I'll turn it over to our co-chairs.
All right, thank you so much for that, Claudette. Agenda item 3 is approval of minutes from the May 12, 2021 meeting. You all received a copy of the minutes from the meeting on May 12, 2021. Please take a few minutes to review and let us know if there are any changes or edits. We'll take approximately 2 minutes. Are there any changes to the minutes?
Yes, I have a change on item number 8. My name, Jamie, is misspelled. No problem.
Are there any other changes? Anyone on the phone? Okay, well, thank you. Do I have a motion for the approval of the minutes? Those on the call, please state your name for the record.
Julia Vickery.
I have a motion made by Julia Vickery. Is there a second?
Luis Franco, second.
Could you please repeat your name? Luis.
Luis Franco.
Okay. I have a second by Luis Franco. Members those are in favor say aye.
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 Those that are opposed, please say no. Okay. Motion passes, and let's move on to agenda item number 4.
Say I already forgot to turn on my mic. I apologize. Moving on to agenda item number 4, update on annual report to the board. The committee co-chairs provided an annual report to the Coordinating Board's Committee on Academic and Workforce Success. We provided that report last week. It's a summary of the work of the committee, including the approval of the 2 items for the last application cycle, the coordination of the ApplyTexas preview, a high-level overview of the AWS transition, and the outcomes of the usability study conducted by the ApplyTexas Committee Strategic Planning Subcommittee. There were no questions from the board committee members. Are there any questions from the ApplyTexas Advisory Committee regarding the report to the board? Okay. Hearing none, we're going to move on to agenda item number 5, which is the discussion on the Communications Subcommittee. Last year, the committee discussed the need for improved communications for all stakeholders, including institutions, K-12 partners, and users. The committee established the Communications Subcommittee. This subcommittee was chaired by our previous 2-year co-chair, Dr. Mordecai Brownlee. The subcommittee assisted and advised the coordinating board and ApplyTexas staff on committee and ApplyTexas system communications. There continues to be a need for more communication to various stakeholder groups. The coordinating board is developing a communication plan for ApplyTexas and would benefit from continued conversations and streamlining communications among the agency, ApplyTexas team, and the advisory committee. Does the committee want to continue this subcommittee? And if yes, do we have someone who is willing to lead this work? And again, make sure, please state your name so that we can record that in the minutes. So I'll make a few comments. I do believe that there is a continued need for the communications subcommittee. I think the AWS transition, I think, really highlighted some of the gaps in the communication. And I'm sure that several of you as representatives of or members of the ATAC spent a lot of time talking about the past year and communicating. And so I do think that there is a need for continued communication at least from my point of view. But I'm interested in what other members of the committee, their thoughts. Not all at once.
Can you provide more detail on the communications committee itself?
Absolutely. So, Claudette, would you like to talk more about that?
So over the past couple of years, there's been a need for communications. Last year, we were really trying to figure out whose role and responsibility it was to share communications through the groups. Our ApplyTexas team at UT does provide communication to administrative users of the ApplyTexas application system. They also have a list to stakeholders at the K through 12 that utilize the counselor suite. So they have those communications covered, but through this exercise, or what Jamie shared, is that we recognized there was a gap in other communications for all sorts of stakeholders, like the students, like the counselors, like different groups that don't have access to the administrative suite or the counselor suite. So that's where we had long discussions, or not too long, but a real good discussion about the need. At the time, our agency was also hiring a specific marketing and communications division. So we kept saying, let's coordinate with that team as well. Since then, we have made some strides in trying to create more of a streamlined communication plan, but we could use the support and some feedback from our committee members. And so that's where we're asking to continue, because we felt like there was a need for one. Really, it's just saying, are we providing any, or overlooking the need for different stakeholder groups? We also realized that we do not, as an agency or pretty much any level, have a full list of enrollment personnel that would need these communications. Again, the ApplyTexas team has only those that are in the administrative suite, not anywhere outside of that. So if there are personnel in every institution that could benefit from some communications or updates about the system, we need to identify those, and that's where we need some help and support from you all. So as Jamie mentioned, I think there is a high need for the communications subcommittee. Last year, we really met by phone and virtually. It was a lot of emails back and forth, and then we would just report to this committee at the next meeting. So that's pretty much the extent of, if anyone wants to lead, it was just connecting with me, the co-chairs, and the ApplyTexas team every now and then. But we would need somebody to lead that subcommittee as well. So as Jamie mentioned, I do feel like it would be beneficial to have the communication subcommittee, at least to be a liaison between the different stakeholder groups.
I would also mention last year that the communications subcommittee worked with the strategic planning subcommittee on conducting some different, on just the communication and the wording, on conducting some of the surveys that Miguel will talk about in a bit. But I think that was also helpful. And another stakeholder group that top of mind was families and parents. And so thinking about how we're communicating with them as well.
And this is a little, like, the agenda's a little bit out of order, but we do have discussions on other committee groups. So we do have, this past year, we had the communications subcommittee, and we did have the a strategic planning committee, and that was led by Miguel at UT. He's on the call. We don't have a formal update from that committee, but it is going to be discussed that committee is going to continue. And there's also consideration later on in the agenda for other additional subcommittees, so we can talk about then. If you want to think about it a little bit more, we might move to that point later here in the agenda. But yes, anyone on the call have any comments? Anyone that served on the committee last year have any comments or anything to add?
So hearing no comments at this point, I think that we should move on through the rest of the agenda. And then when we talk about the other subcommittees, we'll talk about communication. And obviously, I know we all have a lot on our plates and a lot to do. So thinking about it, and certainly if we don't make a decision today of who wants to serve on that and you need a little bit more time, you can certainly email us after the meeting. But we will send some additional communication out about the subcommittees and things. All right, so let's move on to agenda item 6.
All right, thank you. Agenda item 6 is discussion on progress of transition to the new ApplyTexas application system. As you all know, ApplyTexas transitioned to the new application beginning on July the 1st. Graham Chapman will provide an overview and update of the progress of the transition to the ApplyTexas application system. Graham.
Thanks, Chantel. Morning, everybody. Starting with just a brief recap of why we were doing this, I'd encourage folks to reread the board report that we looked at a couple agenda items earlier. Broadly speaking, we have had several usability reports over the years, suggesting that the user interface needed to be updated to be more intuitive and accessible for our applicants. We knew that it was especially important to make a mobile-friendly version of the interface, and we knew that we were trying to reduce the operating costs associated with the infrastructure. So we have worked for several years to prepare that change. We had a mutual testing period in the spring. We rolled out the new applicant site on July 1st, and then we have progressively rolled out some of the rest of the materials. And that has been a challenging transition. We know there's some inherent complexity in these big technology changes. The previous system ran successfully for more than 20 years, and over that time accrued some idiosyncrasies that were challenging to unearth and resolve in the new system. We know also that the pandemic made some things more complicated, and especially for us, that had some impacts on staffing. David Muck with me is the last remaining technical member of the team that met in May as we were in the thick of implementation, and we've had a complete refresh in the rest of that team. In fact, we had 2 layers of refresh. The first line rolled over, and then the second line that we brought in also had quite a bit of churn. And so that staffing turnover hit us right as we were in the end game, preparing to go live. So we turned on the applicant site in July. We have mostly relied on the legacy administrative site to configure applications, but we have been enabling more and more functionality in that site over the late summer and early fall, and the high school counselor site released earlier this month. So the upshot is we're very close to a stable situation now. If we compare numbers of applications saved and submitted year over year, one thing that I should note is last year was aberrant. Also, thanks to the pandemic, we were down across the board last year. But if we compare this year to last year and the previous year, as of yesterday, I'll start with this year and work my way backward through history. So this year, we have had a total of a little more than 451,000 applications saved or submitted. Of those, the breakdown is near 230,000 saved, so somebody has started to make an application, and 220,000 submitted. So we're at 49% of people who are engaging with the system actually submitting an application so far. If we compare that to last year, so again, the total number this year so far, and David already tells me that since we drew these numbers yesterday, we're more than 10,000 off because we're in a very active period of the year. Last year at this time, we had a total of 310,000, of which 140,000 were saved and 170,000 had been submitted. In 2020 at this time, we had 447,000 total, of which 180,000 were saved and 270,000 were submitted. So the broad storyline there is we're doing a healthy business. We have a lot of throughput. We actually have more engagement with the system this year than in any year prior. We're a little lower on the rate of applications that have made it to a submitted state by now. So we've, again, a total of 220,000 versus 170 last year and 270 the previous year. But we're in the ballpark for sort of normal activity at this time of year. And so I say that in part, we know that we've had some challenges both in the student-facing functionality and especially in the functionality to transmit applications to higher eds. We've also heard some really positive feedback from students. If we go back to the strategic planning subcommittee and the usability reports that we've heard, this new application has delivered on all of the major requests that, with the exception of a Spanish language version. So, being mobile friendly, having automatic save functionality built in, streamlining the experience to make it easier to answer sections like residency questions and so on. We've had a very positive review from applicants about those kinds of experiences. On the back end, as we've been transmitting all of those applications to schools, certainly this was a turbulent rollout, and certainly after going live, we discovered, sort of additional requirements that we should have better understood going in to make sure that all of this information will work effectively for all of the various stakeholders. We are now to the point where we've stabilized on staffing. We have a good, healthy roster of folks doing the work. We've got a manageable backlog of tasks. We've all got our eyes on December 1st and making sure that everything is ship-shape between now and then. There are about 80 remaining known bugs in the backlog, and we're in the middle of organizing 1-week work cycles between now and Thanksgiving to knock those out, do a robust testing approach on each of those various things, and make sure everybody has the applications they need. There are, as I noted, there are some inherent complexities in any kind of technology change like this. This new infrastructure that we're on is very powerful, is very flexible. It will scale to whatever demand. It also requires sage guidance, and so we had one period so far where we had an undersized component. We responded to that rapidly and have not seen those issues again. But of course, we are in the thick of double checking and triple checking all of those components as we get into the end game, because we know that we will have more activity as we get near the deadline than ever before. And of course, we're seeing activity ramping up day by day at the moment. So that's the overall update. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions to share?
Michael Sanders, I have a question for you, Graham. The previous application, we've been able to see the data that you just reported on for the new application readily available on the ApplyTexas.org website. Is that information for summer moving forward 22 application available on that website?
I'm sorry, is which information on which website?
The information that you just shared about the comparison for summer 22, fall 22 applications comparative to last year.
Yeah, so right now we've got we've got year-over-year comparisons through last cycle in the old site. And then we've got the application counts for the new cycle only in the new count. We have not imported information from the old cycle into the new system. So each set of numbers is available, but they're not available in the normal head-to-head comparison right now. Going forward, they will be as we accumulate activity there.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
I have a question, Mr. Chapman. Do I have to introduce myself again? Oh, Andres Arredondo with St. Philip's College. Just out of curiosity, I know locally at St. Philip's, we're having, pushing our folks to kind of change their passwords to log back into the suite. Is there a way, or are we looking at how many individuals have reactivated their accounts? And if so, or if not, is there plans to do so? Because I think in terms of communication, that may be a big red flag.
Thank you, Andres. That's a great question. So I will say, as we track trends with the help desk, the issues with passwords and with moving accounts from the old system to the new system certainly represent a significant volume of the contacts that we're receiving, and that's an area of focus for the team right now. We're trying to make sure, we've heard a variety of reports that folks aren't getting the confirmation emails that they need to activate their new accounts. We've also had some examples where folks in administrative roles don't have all the permissions that they should have to see the right content. These are tricky problems to solve because there are so many moving pieces and so many various solutions as we get out into local networks and device settings and so on. And so partly, I mean, we see the overall volume and are treating that as a top priority. And partly we are looking at whether anything about that process can be simplified to, be less reliant on factors out of our control. It is very important that we establish that the person trying to establish an account has control over the email address. So, I mean, of course, we've all experienced similar things. And we're trying to solve why some of those confirmation messages are getting trapped in the process. I'm not sure that I've actually answered your question, though. So what is the core issue?
There's not a core issue. It's just, again, reintroduce. Okay. Just no core issue. I was just curious, thinking about just the volume of professionals, right, that need suite access. Is there a way to monitor, or is that even looked at? And if so, does it look like we have less people that have active accounts?
I see. That's okay. So that's a great question. So especially among higher ed users, how many are engaged with the system, and with high school counselors, probably similar. Those numbers are available. I don't have the latest numbers at hand. I will tell you, in the very first week that we turned on the high school counselor suite earlier this month, within 4 days, so if we look at all of last year, we had more than half of that activity in the first 4 days of the new system being enabled. So we certainly had a lot of interest and uptake there, and then we'll expect it to sort of tail off from there. Likewise, in the higher ed ranks, we have certainly had a lot of uptake. It's a little bit less apples to apples because folks have changed roles year over year, and different folks are being introduced. But we'll pull the numbers and follow up afterward. Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
This is Andy Benoit. Graham, I have a question. You talked about roughly there are about 80 fixes that you're working on right now. Can you give us kind of a broad overview of kind of what those would include? Are they operational? Are they things with the software itself? Could you just please give us an idea or an understanding?
Yeah, Andy, thanks for the question. So they vary, but if we were to group them, some of them are applicant-specific idiosyncrasies about saving data. So, for example, an applicant will try to save an essay or try to modify some piece of profile information or something, and find that it's not behaving as expected. These are not universal problems. These always, we have long since prioritized the kinds of problems that are affecting broad swaths of applicants. And so we're still working through whatever edge conditions lead to those kinds of issues for certain applicants. So roughly speaking, there's a bundle of issues around applicants that are having difficulty accessing or modifying saved information. There's a second bundle that we just discussed around login behavior and authorization. So we know that some number of folks in various roles are having difficulty receiving the confirmation message that they need to activate their account. We also know that a few folks in higher ed roles are having difficulty accessing all of the content and the admin site that they should. There seems to be a divide between newly created accounts for folks versus accounts that were carried forward from the old system. We're still exploring that. There's a third category that I'll call infrastructure optimizations. So as an example right now, once in a great while, we will see a mismatch where an applicant has completed their work, they're trying to submit it, and they're trying to pay for the application. And every now and then, the submission doesn't go through, but the payment does, leaving somebody in absolutely the wrong state. And we've talked about that a couple of times in other forums. We are monitoring those and fixing those daily. What's happening there is we've got a code sequence that's just a little too elaborate and is timing out in some circumstances. And so those are the kinds of things where we're going through and optimizing the performance, partly to eradicate that kind of problem, and especially, with an eye to, more and more demand as we progress toward December 1st. So those are the big buckets. And then there are a number of issues affecting more specific groups. So, for example, we know that there is some logic that needs to be retooled for GED students who are facing an impossible question about a high school answer that is not applicable given the GED answer. We've just recently worked through something similar with residency, where we knew that given a certain set of answers to the residency question, folks were presented with an impossible status in the system. So there are a few of those kinds of things. Increasingly, we're talking about very small populations. You know, we're doing 10 to 15,000 applications a day, and we're talking about handfuls of students that are experiencing some of these kinds of conditions. So those are the major buckets. As we look across everything, there no doubt are a few outliers, but that gets at the gist of the kinds of things that we're looking at.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments? Okay. Graham, thank you so much for the update. Thank you all for the discussion. Let's move on to agenda item number 7. Agenda item number 7 is a discussion and possible action to establish additional subcommittees. As a reminder, the advisory committee currently has established 2 subcommittees, Communications Subcommittee and a Strategic Planning Subcommittee led by Miguel W. There's been an interest in establishing 2 new subcommittees, a subcommittee to address the skip logic for residency, and a subcommittee of high school representatives to advise on the ApplyTexas application and counselor suite. Does the committee want to establish these committees?
So before I can give you a little bit more context to this, as I mentioned, the past year has only been those 2 subcommittees, which have been led by different individuals. There's been a growing interest for connections from our K through 12 partners, specifically around the counselor suite side and the application side. There are rules that allow the K through 12 groups to come and talk to our committee. We've had them come and present or talk to us in the past, or talk to the committee in the past. But there is a significant interest to build a committee specifically around our K through 12 partners. Again, that would require someone to lead that effort. I still think it's really important to bring in those stakeholders because they are the start of the application. They're your users of the application, and so they're a really important piece to this that we could use their feedback. Another growing interest for this committee is because there are now some new policy changes, specifically around the FAFSA graduation requirement. I think a lot of you are familiar with that. So there is in the counselor suite, for those of you who are not as familiar with the counselor suite, because a lot of you all are on the institution side, and we did give a presentation last year to let you see what that looks like, and I can do that again this year. But the counselor suite is a tool for counselors and authorized users to be able to access student level data to see the application, the ApplyTexas applications that are in there. So it's student level data for that. And then there's another set of data that feeds into the counselor suite, and it's the FAFSA filing status. So that has been of huge value and importance to our K through 12 partners because they use that tool to now demonstrate before whether the student completed a FAFSA, but now it's even more important because it does show whether a student has completed and met that graduation requirement. So there's a growing interest to have this stakeholder, the K through 12 partners, be a part of the discussion to kind of think through that part of the ApplyTexas system now. A lot of the committee's focus is again, always been from the institutional perspective. We've kind of seen questions come into the through the UT group or through any of the members here on a regular basis about changing application questions to receive data at the institution side. But I think we definitely need to start bringing in more of that K through 12 group for identifying other areas of need and improvement, including the application and the counselor suite as part of the system. So I definitely encourage a separate subcommittee for that, and we could gain a lot of feedback and value from establishing that subcommittee.
Thank you, Claudette. Is there anyone else in the committee that has a comment or a question about establishing these two subcommittees?
And real quickly, the other subcommittee, the Residency Logic Committee, that was actually in discussions that occurred during the regular stand-up meetings. As I think was mentioned earlier, some of the thing, as we rolled into the Amazon Web Services, ApplyTexas team, along with myself, have been hosting regular meetings to kind of provide more timely information for the administrative users of the ApplyTexas system on the institution side. And so during those meetings, there was some discussion or need for a review of the residency logic, just to kind of what Graham mentioned a little bit earlier in trying to identify what can be provided to the institution that could meet the residency question. So really reviewing the logic part, there was a huge interest on the stand-up meetings from those groups that say we want to be on this subcommittee. So there's a lot of interest. We just need someone from this committee to lead that effort.
Okay, if we do have these subcommittees, is there anyone that would consider leading them?
Amy Williams, Central Texas College. I would like to lead the residency one.
Thank you.
Andy Benoit, Texas A&M Corpus Christi. I'll be happy to work with the communications.
Thank you so much for that. Okay. Now, I guess.
K through 12. And Miguel, are you still leading the Strategic Planning Committee?
So Miguel Vasilevsky, UT Austin. I'm fine doing it, Claudette, but if someone else has a desire to lead that, I also don't want to step in their way.
Does anyone want to resume that responsibility? Miguel's done a fantastic job. So if he still wants to lead, I'm on board with that if you all are. But if there's anyone else to offer that opportunity to you, does anyone else want to take on the Strategic Planning Committee? I can share a little bit more about that too. Miguel worked really well with establishing a group or a survey. He basically worked with a smaller group to say, these are some of the things we want for improvements to the ApplyTexas application. So he was able to work with a report, and the report is a summary of the report is provided in the board report that went to our board for approval, so you can see that. But a lot of that was a survey, a usability study, I believe, and it identified some areas where there could be some improvements on the ApplyTexas system, and that's all in a formal report. We could probably provide the full report to you, new committee members as well, but that was provided last year. That was a lot of the work that the committee did, and Miguel led that effort, and he reported on that to our committee. So it's really trying to think about more strategically how their additional improvements, and not really just the technical, but some of the other improvements that we can hear from the field. So if there's any interest in someone else taking that role, please let us know. Miguel's more than happy to provide that opportunity to others or continue, is what I'm hearing. Anyone else interested?
And maybe if you're not interested in chairing it, but working alongside with Miguel, I think that
there's definitely opportunity for that too. So Miguel, if you're okay with it, we still would like for you to continue that effort. There was a lot that was gained from the last year, and there's still more that the committee can do. So are you okay with continuing as a lead?
Sure, I'm definitely happy continuing, and certainly those that might, past this meeting have interest in being more involved are certainly welcome to contact me, and we can definitely work together.
Thank you, Miguel. And there will be opportunities to be, if you don't want to lead the effort like Jamie mentioned, you can still be a part of the subcommittees. There'll be communications from those subcommittees to reach out once there's an interest, and we can, share an email with you all to provide what that entails a little bit more, and then you can take on that role and responsibility of serving on the subcommittee or leading it. We still have one that's an area of need. I'll just throw it one more time. It's the K through 12 subcommittee. If there's anyone on the call or in here would like to lead that, And you will be provided support. You won't be just out there without any any help at all. I am very I work closely with our subcommittees as well as our co-chairs. So please let us know if anyone on the call or here would be interested in leading that group.
Jennifer Beal, I'll lead the K through 12.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. We appreciate that. And like I mentioned, there will be other opportunities for anyone else who's not leading to join one of these subcommittees, and we'll be sending that description out to the group after the meeting. Thank you all for your leadership and agreeing to the subcommittee work.
Yes, we appreciate your willingness to serve.
On this, may I ask a question? On the subcommittees, is there an opportunity to bring in some of your own employees from your institution?
Yes, it's a very good question. Yes, it's not limited just to the members. You can actually bring in others to talk. The benefit of that is that you're bringing in other stakeholders and other groups to inform. The only thing that they are not able to do is vote. You all are the only voters on the committee. So that's the only thing, that's the distinction. But yes, you are welcome to bring in others from your field.
Okay. All right. Thank you to everyone who volunteered to serve. Does the committee want to take a short break and continue with the next agenda item? Break? Okay, let us take a 10-minute break. We will return promptly at 10:15 a.m. All right, thank you, everyone, for promptly returning from the break. I do need to go through the roll call one more time just to assure quorum. So when I call your name, please just say here. Aurelio Andres.
Here.
Jennifer Beal.
Here.
Okay, I am Chantel Blake, and I am here. Graham Chapman.
Here.
Cynthia Cortez.
Here.
Okay. Hannah DeLand.
Here.
Jamie Hansard.
Here.
David Muck.
Here.
All right. Michael Sanders.
Here.
Michael Telemontes.
Here.
Thank you. Amy Williams. Here. Claudette Jinks.
Here.
Okay. David Barron.
Here.
Scott Benoit Bennett. Okay. Andy Benoit.
Here.
Thank you. Louis Franco.
Here.
Loris Dell.
Here.
Mardell Maxwell.
Here.
Okay. Has Tristan Pepper joined us? Okay. Stephanie Salazar. Okay, she's not here. Julia Vickery.
Here.
Thank you. Michelle Walker.
Here.
Miguel Waleski, excuse me for murdering your name. Miguel?
Here.
Thank you so much. All right. Veronica Lopez
Here.
and Jennifer Waits.
Here.
All right. Thank you for that. Now let's move to agenda item number 8. And Jamie, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chantel. Item 8 is the review and possible action to approve proposed changes to the ApplyTexas applications or procedures carried forward from 2021-2022. As Claudette shared earlier, part of the task of this committee is to discuss and vote on changes that may be needed to the applications for the upcoming application cycle. The committee reviews requests for changes submitted to the committee through a few ways. Requests come to the ApplyTexas team via the administrative suite, from the coordinating board as part of a legislative request or requirement, or through a committee member. The ApplyTexas committee and ApplyTexas team have streamlined this process by establishing a form to collect these change requests. Each request is presented to the committee for consideration and prioritization. We have also learned that this may be helpful to have the requester be available to share more about the request. This is a new process to consider as the committee prioritizes changes for the next cycle. In your meeting materials is a list of change requests that were discussed for the last application cycle and a list of new items for consideration. Please see the materials labeled the Tech Team Update. For those of you in person, it looks like this document right here. David Muck will now review and revisit pending requests for revisions to the ApplyTexas application carried forward for consideration from last year. These are items the committee tabled for discussion for the next application cycle, either because additional information was needed or it was not a priority at that time. For this initial meeting, the committee will review and consider these items and any new items received. I'll now ask David to provide an update.
Thank you, Jamie. A quick review of numbers first. For the fall 2021 semester that we're currently in, we are still receiving applications for that semester. We are down 5% in submitted applications compared to the same time period last year, so as a comparison to fall 2020. 4-year submissions are down 7%, and 2-year submissions are down 3%. There has been steady improvement in these numbers since we first started looking at them last year. At the time, they were down 35% in early November of last year. And then for the fall 2022 semester, we've seen an increase of 45% in total applications, so applications that have been started by an applicant, and an increase of 30% in submitted applications compared to the same time last year. Last year was obviously a very strange year, So I wanted to look at the same numbers compared to 2 years ago, comparing to those numbers during the same time period, so mid to late October, we're actually up 1% in total applications, but we are down 17% in submitted applications. Fraudulent apps continue to be a problem for some of our institutions, and it's an ongoing battle, and we keep working on it. And then I keep this reminder in here, but reminder that we do have 3 daily transmission time periods if anyone's interested in 7 a.m. or 12 p.m. in addition to or instead of the 6 p.m. Transmission. We can easily make that change for you. All 3 of the main portals, applicant, administrator, and counselor, are active on Amazon Web Services. And the plan right now is to gradually retire the legacy system that's still taking applications in for fall 2021 and spring 2022, and we'll plan to retire that over the course of spring 2022. And then I'm just going to go over these first 3 proposals. All 3 of these are carry forward from the last time we met, or the last application cycle, rather. The first was a proposal to add a grade received field to the education information section to facilitate self-reporting of grades. That was a request by the University of Houston. The second is a proposal to add an additional question if the applicant enters a phone number and indicates that that phone number is a cell phone. Just an opt-in question for opting into text messaging. And the third is a proposal to add fields to collect the Pearson Test of English scores to the test pages. Questions on any of the numbers, or I guess discussion of any of the 3 proposals carried forward from last year?
David, I have a question. Going back to the item about the comparison to fall 17% down in submitted applications, do you have a breakdown between 2- and 4-year schools for that? And then that's one question. And then my second part of that question is, why do we think that is? Is that going back to the one-offs that kind of Graham was talking about with, or do we have any additional context for why that's happened, or why we're down so much?
So the first part, I don't have the 2-year, 4-year breakdown handy, but I can easily get that.
Okay.
As far as why, we started seeing this trend last year where applicants were starting apps and then waiting to submit. Now, last year was clearly a very different year. We're not sure if there's carryover from some of the same reasons that they were waiting to submit, but that could be part of it. A second reason, I think, is some of the edge cases that Graham mentioned likely influenced that. And then a third reason is when we initially opened, we needed to delay transmission of data to institutions. I suspect some applicants saw that note because we put that on the, when they were starting the app and when they were submitting in the app, and probably delayed because of that. Additionally, we had some schools choose to open later than they normally do, open their applications, make their applications available later. I think all of that has contributed. I don't know the reason, though, if there's one overarching reason, but my guess is all of that has contributed.
Right, I think you're probably right. Thank you for providing that additional context. That's very helpful.
Jennifer Beal. Hi, David. I have a question about the phase out of the legacy. You said it was going to happen over the course of the spring 2022 time. Do you know exactly when? I know that some institutions use it all the way up until the end of May.
Right. We're going to make sure the app is open for any institutions that are still receiving apps. That'll be the first decision. And then we just want to make sure any additional data that we need to move from on-prem at the University of Texas at Austin to the cloud has been moved appropriately and all of that.
Great, thank you.
So David, when that happens, I would anticipate that that would be a lot of communication, right, coming from, so that would potentially be something the communication subcommittee would want to consider.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. All right, any additional questions about the items that David has covered thus far? Okay.
This is Mardell from the University of Houston. Is there a place where there's more detail about the proposals that have been submitted for updates or changes? I see a brief description in the agenda on those proposals, but I was just wondering if when institutions may submit these requests, if there's a bit more detail or context to some of these requests.
Yes, there's a form or a document that we usually have, or that David's provided in the past. It's a spreadsheet, David, do you remember? And it would say who the requester was, what the request is. The form, and if I don't answer your question, please let me know, but yes, for those that are captured through the ApplyTexas system or on the change request form, we try to put everything on those forms so that we have a feedback loop of what the justification is, how it could be prioritized with the committee, or considered with the committee and then prioritized if need be, and then a feedback loop to those institutions that did the requesting. We have not done a good job in the past with that, but we're trying again to streamline that process, and that's why we try to include everything on a change request form so that it's documented and that we have a follow-up to those institutions. So in the past, David has provided that spreadsheet that would provide that information, and for the next meeting, we could probably have that, right, David? I hope that answers your question.
Mardell, in addition, I would just add that, I apologize for speaking over you, but I would just add in addition that those that submit a request are, of course, invited to come and present that request as well in case there's questions and to share additional information.
Thank you. That is helpful. And one more follow-up question. As a new member, I'm interested in, and once we receive those requests, what does the process look like for this group to consider, discuss, debate, send follow-up questions? Does that happen here, or are these proposals then given to a subcommittee to work through?
Great question, and I can answer that. So typically in these meetings, like this meeting works a little differently because it's an introductory meeting of everyone. You all are new. We're trying to orient you to the tasks that you have at hand. So that's what these meetings are. So if you do have any questions, there's a lot of great questions coming through. But yes, the way the committee works is these requests are brought forth to the committee for consideration. In the next 2 to 3 meetings, you all will review them. We do provide those ahead of time, like you've got in your meeting materials. If there are specific change requests in their forms, we put those forms in your meeting material packets for consideration. The list that was provided to you today was carried over, items that were carried over from last year and those that occurred over the summer, so that you can see that there was a lot of different requests that came in from different areas, and they were not submitted through a formal form like we'd like, but they were either identified in the stand-up meetings that we hosted, that the ApplyTexas team hosted, or individual emails that came in to the help desk. So that's a little different this year because of the transition, but typically we like to move each of the individual requests to a request form so that there is a justification provided to help you all better make those decisions on what you want to consider for the next application cycle and what you prioritize. The other thing is, based on today's list, what will happen is the ApplyTexas team, you all will discuss, like, these are some areas that I think would be a good idea based on this list. And if you don't have to have all the answers now, we have the rest of a couple of meetings to talk. You all have the rest of these meetings to talk about this. But if there's a couple that for sure you want to move forward, what will happen is the ApplyTexas team will take those items and say, this is going to be either a high, medium, low lift to actually incorporate into the application. So, like myself, I don't know all the technical specifications that are required to make some significant changes. So we rely on the technical team to tell us, this will be an easy fix, or this will be an easy thing to include. So then that's where you all can better make you can make some better decisions with that information to see if it's too heavy of a lift. You might want to consider it for the next application cycle, or if you want to prioritize it because it's something that is in desperate need for change. Those are what you will be discussing through the next few meetings. I hope does that make sense?
Yes,
So,
very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. And please, anyone on the call or anyone here, continue asking these types of questions. We know you're new, and we want to make sure that you're properly acclimated to the roles of the committee.
This
Are
is
there-
Michelle Walker with Texas A&M. I'm not new, but I do have a question. Is the form posted in the admin site?
It's in the old, the legacy administrative site, Michelle.
Okay, because I do have a request that has come out of some of the errors we're seeing in the EDI. So I will put in a request. Let me let you know what it is. It's to validate, to do validation on the parent addresses. Right now, I think there are some rules that are in place to make sure that those addresses don't exceed certain limits, but they are not being run through the validation process like the student address is. So I'm going to put that request in.
So, David, just a quick clarifying question. Will you be rolling over the form to the new system sometime?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And the legacy, the form is on the legacy site. So if you have, it's more work if you don't fill out that form, but if you do have an opportunity to fill that form out, it is very helpful so that you all can make, it provides a justification, it provides different explanation as to why it's needed. So it's really a good form for the committee to review to make those decisions. But I just wanted to make sure it's on the new site soon so that you can use and have access to that form. So thank you, David.
Claudette, would it be helpful if we were able to post that on the coordinating board website where we list all the ApplyTexas information? Would that be a possibility? I just think about there's probably folks that aren't working in the administrative suite that may want to make changes.
Yes, we can add that form to our ApplyTexas site. For those of you not familiar, our ApplyTexas site is located within the coordinating board website, so it is a drop down, and we could probably add that to the form there as well. Good idea.
Any other comments about what David has provided thus far?
Amy Williams, Central Texas College. Have we, has the variable been considered about CRMs? Maybe that's why numbers are down, people using their own application. For example, I don't know, but my applications are probably only about 10% ApplyTexas. So is that a survey?
Yeah, I do think it's likely as more schools take advantage of other applications, it makes perfect sense that we would see declining numbers.
Is it a job of this committee to push more towards the ApplyTexas rather than using your own? Is that kind of more the communication side?
It is the responsibility of the ApplyTexas Advisory Committee to promote the use of ApplyTexas application, right? One application for all of our students. But it is not a requirement that that is the only application that we can use. But it is our responsibility to help promote the use of the application.
And for those of you unfamiliar, it does say in the rules too, like every public institution is required to accept, and that's the way the rules are written, they're to accept the ApplyTexas application. As Jamie mentioned, there are opportunities for others to use and other applications, but the benefit of using this application is that the agency can receive that data, so we could make more data-driven decisions with that information at the agency. So that is what the value of utilizing the ApplyTexas system or the applications is of great value to the state, because we're able to use that data to make, for research and all those other areas as well.
Okay, hearing no other comments, going to ask David if he would move on to the discussion and possible action to adopt new proposed changes to the ApplyTexas forms or procedures.
Absolutely. So this is starting with the fourth bullet point down under future cycle proposals and updates. The first of these is a proposal to extend the length of the field that collects the name of high school senior courses. This is a suggestion from the ApplyTexas technical team and has been requested by quite a few applicants this year. It actually seems like more than in previous years. We've always told them fit as much as you can, but we think it would be a good idea to consider extending the length of that data element. Should I just move through these? Okay. The second is a proposal to include relevant questions about selective service registration, and this is a proposal by the University of Texas at Austin. And the context for it is right below. Federal regulations have been changed to no longer require institutions to verify that male recipients of federal aid be registered with selective service. The FAFSA document will no longer include questions related to selective service registration, and the response will not be matched against the selective service database. This means that the results of the database match will not be data that is provided to institutions. The issue at hand is that state of Texas regulations require males who receive state-funded aid, which includes state grants, work study, and exemptions waivers, to file a statement attesting that they are registered or exempted. The student's response on the FAFSA will no longer satisfy Texas regulations as providing a statement. If the ApplyTexas application included relevant questions about selective service registration, this could serve as the statement. The responses could be imported into an institution's enterprise system, allowing for automated processes to deal with the exceptions rather than collecting a new document from each recipient. That's proposal number 2. The next proposal is a proposal to add a second optional deadline for graduate majors. So the way the application currently works, you can set a deadline and up to 3 optional deadlines for each application type for each semester. In addition to that, for graduate majors only, you can set a deadline for those graduate majors. This proposal would request that there be an additional graduate major deadline possible, and I'll read the context now. Currently, the major-specific deadline for graduate programs only gives the option for 1 deadline. Can we add another deadline similar to the optional deadlines provided in the regular semester-specific settings? And so it's for like a fall A and a fall B. And this proposal was by the University of Texas at Permian Basin. The next proposal is simply a proposal to extend the maximum length of major titles. Currently, the maximum length is 60 characters. And this is a proposal by the Dallas Baptist University. The next proposal is to add additional terms to the ApplyTexas application. We have 5 defined terms right now: spring, summer 1, summer, summer 2, and fall, that institutions can choose to use from amongst those. And this specific request is for a fall 2 term. And that proposal was by Trinity Valley Community College. The next one, so the next few were not, I guess, proposals using the form. They've come about because numerous schools have asked about these over the course, and I offered to present them for consideration. So the next one is consideration for making the gender question on the profile required question, and this is due to state reporting requirements. The next one is consideration for making the international application representative address collection fields consistent with the rest of the address fields on the application. So for those 2 address fields for the application representative, they're just 2 free-form text fields that applicants can put in address line 1, address line 2, city, state, country, and the suggestion, and this is from the ApplyTexas technical team, that we just make them standard with the rest of the address fields on the app. So defined fields for address 1, city, state, and country, and zip. The next one is consideration for expanding address verification to additional address fields. As Michelle just mentioned, currently the only 2 addresses that we pass through verification are the permanent and physical addresses that the applicant enters on the application. I think we should have consideration for passing all our addresses, or at least more addresses, through address verification. And this suggestion is from the ApplyTexas technical team and Texas A&M University. The next one I'll skip because I think it's been handled elsewhere. And then the last one is consideration for the creation of scholarship-associated custom questions. The way the scholarship application currently works is schools can define university and major-specific scholarships that are presented to the applicant. The applicant can indicate that they want to apply for those university and major-specific scholarships. If they do, the institution can associate required essay questions with those scholarships. And we think it would be a good enhancement to the scholarship application to, in addition to essays, give schools the ability to associate custom questions with the selection of those university and major-specific scholarships. And that's another suggestion from the ApplyTexas technical team.
Thank you, David. Appreciate that. At this point, are there questions or comments or additional information needed for any of the items that David presented, including the items that were moved forward from last year's cycle and then the new items of request? So I think we'll open it up with the discussion there.
Michael Talamantes. Regarding gender identity, I know that the formal request will be put, but I would like to submit that formal request, particularly because being a banner school, having the validation tables in Spaden, done some cross work with women in gender studies, et cetera, to have those available for students. I feel it's important because it's after the fact at orientation, when we're doing the application intakes at the high schools, they're seeing themselves in those validation tables. So it was just moving forward on that, just a formality of submitting the proposal, and if so, happy to do so to provide any attachments that we've tried to work at ETEP.
Yeah, thank you for that, and we'll take that, the committee can take that into consideration. We'll have to, for any formal, so what I'm hearing is that you want to make a formal request for additional aside from what's been
Yes.
on the list. You can submit a change request to outline what you'd like to see, and then you can bring that for the committee. And then for anything related to gender, we would have to go through our general counsel and along with our leadership for continued discussion. So that's where we will be on that one. But thank you. Yes, that's the process.
Thank you.
Again, are there any items that we would like to discuss further?
Anna Deland, Lamar University. Two of the proposals to me could be combined together. The one from UT Permian Basis about the second optional deadline, as well as proposal to add additional terms. I think one would fix the other, that if you choose additional deadlines, then there wouldn't be a need for multiple fall terms, or if you did the other way around. So those could be merged together.
Which ones were those again? I'm sorry, I'm trying to put that in the notes.
UT Permian Basin, which is about middle of the page, and then the second bullet down at the bottom, from Trinity Valley Community College.
I've noted that.
This is Mardell.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm switching gears, so if that's okay.
So you're in support of combining those, is that what I heard?
Yes, I was changing topics. I didn't want to change if we were still on the
Okay,
previous.
yeah, we'll close that out, but is there any discussion around combining those two? Because those are two separate requests, but from what Hannah's mentioned, one will fix the other. Is there any other discussion around that piece or, with that recommendation?
Well, Andres Arredondo with St. Philip's College. I just need we need some clarification on the graduate component to the UT Permian Basin request versus any effect on the undergraduate app. Additionally, I'd like to ask if there are hard deadlines if we establish a fall 2 and it doesn't necessarily coincide with another institution's. At Alamo College's district, we have a late start term, which is 14 weeks, and then we have 2 flex terms, which are 8 weeks, one of which starts earlier, right? The first 8 weeks, and then latter. So I just want to know exactly if there's any information about the details to the specific terms that are being asked to be added.
Okay, thank you. And that's for those 2 items, correct? Okay, and that, anyone else have any discussion around combining those 2? Other than what Andres mentioned? Anyone on the call? Okay, thank you. Okay, now that section's over. Next item. Somebody mentioned.
Mardell, I think, had a
Mardell,
comment.
okay.
Yeah, I'm going to jump back in. I wanted to go to the first item. There's naturally been a shift around self-reporting of grades, and my observation is schools are here in Texas are migrating in that direction as some are migrating in that direction. Is anyone aware of whether other application platforms that may be used by our students allow for self-reporting of grades?
This is Michelle Walker with Texas A&M. I believe the Common App allows self-reporting of grades. Jamie might be able to answer that better, and I believe Coalition allows it as well, but you have to enable it in Coalition.
Yes, this is Jamie, and Michelle, you are right. You are correct about Common App. We just started with Coalition. I'm not as familiar, but I can get that answer for you.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, in the context of my question, I'm just wondering how this request would compare to some other platforms that our students may be using or considering using if ATA allowed for this sort of functionality.
So if I can say this, Michelle Walker again, we have been using a third-party vendor to collect self-reported academic records. And they provide, it allows the student to enter their high school transcript, all their courses, the rigor of their courses, et cetera. And then they provide some information back to us, some calculations, some, combining of counting of courses, rigor, et cetera, which is very important. I'm not sure, it is a very difficult process to make sure that you provide all of the opportunities for every different type of high school, every different type of course offered. I think it would be a huge undertaking if you were to try to have ApplyTexas do that and to meet the needs of all the high schools. I'm not sure that's in ApplyTexas's purview per se. And I know that this third-party vendor does cooperate with both Coalition and Common App. So if a student fills out their information on Common App, it gets translated to our third-party vendor so that they can then provide us additional factors that we ask for. So, it's not an easy thing to do. Just FYI.
Yeah, great information. And we're in our University of Houston is in its first year of self-reporting. We're using a third party as well. I think certainly this request would not, I agree with you, would not be, it's probably maybe more of a mid to long term, but something for the committee to consider is that if we are seeing a growing number of schools consider or actually implement self-reporting of grades in some way, shape, or form, then the question would lead, from an efficiency standpoint, do we want an environment in the state to where every institution is using a third-party system? Or is there an opportunity to proactively think about how a more centralized tool, and whether a school chooses to use it or not, is the school's prerogative, but that at least one is available. Now, certainly it sounds like there are some other application platforms that have figured it out, so clearly it's not impossible. And we know that there are some other large systems, such as the University of California system, that have modules or functionality for self-reporting as well. So again, obviously, this wouldn't be something that I think if the committee found of value, this wouldn't be something that would happen tomorrow, or even maybe not even next year. We'll leave that for the technical folks to figure out. But my concern is if half of the institutions in Texas went this direction, do we want is it efficient? Is it best for the student a third-party tool? And if all of us are using a different third-party tool, so just something for us to consider.
Right, or perhaps ApplyTexas can partner with one if they've already.
That's a good idea.
Figured out, and
that's a good idea.
We could then perhaps minimize the cost to each institution. Somehow.
I like that as an option as well.
Mardell and Michelle, thank you for those additional comments. We also at Texas Tech just implemented a third-party self-reporting of grades. One thing that I think we would want to keep in mind is, and so we would need to go back and discuss this, of course, with the coordinating board, but to me, I think that could potentially fall within the policy change rather than on technical, and so that may need to go into negotiated rulemaking. We'd need to explore that further before moving forward. So I think at this particular point, I don't know that we have enough information to move forward with that as a discussion item in consideration for this upcoming cycle of change. So just keeping that in mind. Any other comments about any item? What I think at this point, if there are no other comments, I think it might be helpful if we went through each item that we talked about and see if those are identify the items that this committee would like to move forward with, and then ask David and Graham I know that you probably won't have all of the answers, but just based on what we've talked about today, just knowing if that would be considered a, a light, moderate, heavy lift. I know that you'll need to go back, but just starting that conversation for our next meeting in February where we could come back and really vote on the items that we would want to move forward with. Is that acceptable to everyone at this point?
And if there's something you need more questions on, that now would be a good time, like what you just said, Andres. We need more information on this, so we could go back and ask those requesters for that information.
Okay, so let's start. I'm going to not start with bullet one because we just talked about that, about the proposal for the grade received, and that'll be something that we can do some additional research and come back in February and talk about. So moving into item number 2, this was the opt-in for texting. And so this would be a great point where if you have comments or thoughts, obviously identify yourself, and then if you'd like to move forward with this or have additional questions, this would be the place for that.
Hi, this is Julia Vickery from Midland College, and I had on my notes that we had talked about this previously, and because different departments and every college has a little bit different way of handling text, opting out of text messaging, that we had kind of removed this one. But my notes may be wrong, so I just didn't know if anybody else had that same memory.
Julia, I had the memory of, we did talk about it. We talked about how so many different divisions and departments on campus use texting in a variety of different ways, and so there would be some complications. And so I think that I see a couple people shaking heads remembering that conversation. But is this something that we want to table and say, and say we need additional information, or we're ready to say that that is not something the committee is ready to take on at this point?
I'm just glad to know I wasn't the only one that remembered that.
I know, a lot's happened in the last year.
This is Andy Benoit. I just have a comment. I think, you're right. There's going to be a different way of dealing with this on every campus in a lot of departments. But I think those of us that are collecting the information or want to collect the information on the front end, it makes it a whole lot easier if we collect the information like that, the ability to be able to opt in or opt out at the application onset. So I'm in favor.
Thank you, Andy. Any other comments?
This is Laura Isbell with Lone Star College. I'm also in favor in principle with this concept. I'd work on the language a little bit, but in principle, I'm supportive of it.
It's Michelle Walker with Texas A&M. I'm also in support of it. I am just curious, is it going to be, I think you said that if the student reports a cell phone number for, I guess, their own phone, is that what are you going to be specific to a number, or are you just going to ask in general, are you agreeable to receiving text?
When they enter the phone numbers, they designate whether it's work, cell, or a home phone. And I think the way I read the original proposal was if they indicate it's a cell phone, then have this other question pop up.
Okay. Thanks. We already have a question out there for our students, a custom question. So having ApplyTexas ask it would be great.
David, is it possible to find out how many institutions are asking that as a custom question already?
Yeah, I think we could get an idea of that.
Okay. David, Graham, what type of lift would this be? And I know I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, so I apologize.
Yeah, excuse me. In every case, I think we need to do some research before we commit to size, and especially, part of that answer is what's the implementation burden on the technical team, but also, as we've just discussed, what's the implication for institutions? Once we ask the question, there's an obligation to do something with the information, and some of those things will require more evaluation first.
Oh, Jennifer Beal here. I do want to say that when you give people an option, usually they go on the side of caution. And so if we put it out there that, do you want to opt in? Do you want to opt out? Do we feel like it's going to increase the number of people that opt out from that text messaging? Whereas if they didn't have that extra question, maybe it's if you don't put your number in here, or if you're giving us your cell phone number, you're automatically opting in. Like, do we feel like that would increase the amount that would opt out? Does that make sense?
Certainly. I mean, the sort of behavioral economics, it would suggest that might be an easier way to get folks to agree. I think the question, hearkening back to some of the discussion last year, is if a student does choose to opt out through whatever means, then what is the institution's obligation to honor that information? And how long does that last? And so on. And we asked the questions. I don't think we got to outcomes on those conversations, which is part of why we had tabled this, I think.
Yeah, and I think also, I know at my institution, we have multiple departments that are using different text message platforms. So would it be that if they say they opt out on the application, it's opting out from everything from the institution, even if they are doing housing or something like that? Or is it just from the enrollment management sections? Like, I think those are we'd have to get really specific with that.
Well, and I mean, from my point of view, right, as the ApplyTexas Advisory Committee, that we would just be simply asking a question about from the admissions point of view, not certainly for the entire university. And then it would be up to us individually to work with our institutions if you're wanting to take that and carry it throughout and what that communication plan looked like. But I wouldn't think that would be the role of the ApplyTexas Advisory Committee. At least that's my perspective.
Andres Arredondo with St. Philip's College. Just, I guess I worry about the additional tasks, in terms of the responsibility on the institution. I think about change of major forms, change of primary institution forms within our 5 college system. And now we have a change of, decision to opt in or out depending on what they've selected. But I agree. I mean, it is an important inflection point that may cause additional requirements for a process that's already rattled with requirements. So my comment really is that I know it was tabled or moved from last season to this, but I think it does warrant additional review on the technical side of things and the responsibilities of the institutions to figure out what protocols need to be set in place.
I think you make some really good points too, and from what I understand, Julia, too, the conversation was that, again, circling back, every institution already has something in place, and you bring up a good point, Jennifer, the fact that the student may get an assumption that they're opting out to everything, and then when they start getting communication from the school because they've opted in another place, that might be confusing. Just some things to consider, but that's what the purpose of the committee is, to think through some of these things and then come as a joint consensus. One thing I do want, and Graham reminded me, you all are serving in the role of the state. So as Jamie said, committee hat on. You think about, as from your institution, your type of institution or state, not necessarily your specific institution. And what Graham mentioned is that when you make a decision like this, every institution will be responsible for having to accept or change their receipt of that data and have to do something with it. And so those are things you have to consider when you make additions to the application or when you add, or change. So it's a statewide decision and not just for your specific institution. So that's something to think about as you're in your role of the committee.
Yes, and this is Chantel Blake. We also need to make sure we review FCC guidelines when it comes to texting. Like, if we're not there yet, I'm not quite sure if the committee is, if we don't know what the regulations are at this point, I'm not sure if we're quite there to be making a decision for every school in the state. So I just wanted to add that.
This is Laura Isdell with Lone Star College, and I actually was going down the same path, is that there is an expectation with FCC guidelines that if you are going to choose to robo-text or robo-call individuals, that they have both the right to consent and then later opt out. And so if further discussion needs to be had, maybe there is some sense of reaching out to our partner institutions and seeing what they currently have in place to deal with that, and are they texting or robocalling their students? Because if they're not, then it's a non-issue, but if everyone is, this is an expectation anyway that we're all doing it.
Laura, I think that's a great comment. How does the committee feel about if potentially the communications committee looking at the issues and like FCC regulations that both Chantel and Laura brought up, and then if we were to ask the technical committee to take a look at what kind of lift and time allotment that would require should the advisory committee move forward with that, and then we could table the discussion and come back in February with additional information. And Andy, I hate to put you on the spot, but because you were so kind in offering up to chair the communications subcommittee, so please feel free to comment.
No, that is fine. We actually went through a lot of the FCC research when we made our policy here on campus, so I have no problem.
Great, thank you.
I'll just add, thank you, Andy, that's great. I'll just add that there is a current question, and this did come to the committee last year. We have on the ApplyTexas application for the freshmen, a question to opt into our agency's new ADVI chatbot tool. And there is a distinction between the messages that you all have for your schools because they're not specific. They're more campaigns of remember to do XYZ, your next steps. So, and they're regular communications to those students that opt in. That's where some of those are. So just know that there is a current question to opt in to the ADVI piece, and it does, to some of your points, speakers in the call on the phone mentioned that there is an option to opt out, and there is an acknowledgement that you're providing the coordinating board or others to utilize those. So there are some acceptance or acknowledgements on the application to allow that. So we do meet that under those terms. But to Andy's point, I'm glad that you have that information for the FCC, so that kind of gets you a jump start on this, on considering this proposal. And I agree with your recommendation of tabling from a research. But I just wanted to add that there is already an existing question for the ADVI opt-in, and those are by text messages as well. So just letting you guys know that.
Okay, so let's move on to item number 3. This is, again, a proposal that was carried forward from last year, but to collect Pearson test of English scores to the test pages. It was a proposal by Pearson. Any comments or interest in moving forward with this item for discussion at the next?
This is Hannah Deland. I think that we could get in a very tricky situation if we are allowing the testing agencies to request that we add tests, because I do understand we're asking English proficiency on our applications for all international students, specifically TOEFL or IELTS, but I think we need to do what's in the best interest of all of our institutions. And I can speak on behalf of Lamar that we do accept the PTE, the Pearson Test of English, but we only get a small handful. And so I think either we can add some type of other test option so it's a free form that they could fill in, because I know that that list could get long as we're looking for tests for grad and for undergrad, different options. So.
Hannah, thank you for those comments. Are there any other comments? Any interest in moving this forward? Maybe I'll start there. Okay.
This is Michelle with Texas A&M. I just want to say I appreciate that last comment. I think that was very good, and I would support adding an other perhaps. And a student really doesn't have to define who they're getting it from. They could just say that they've taken an other test and when the test date was. That would cover your DET scores, your PTE, and I'm sure there are other providers. So like she said, we don't end up having to address this with every single provider of an English proficiency test.
Hi, this is David Barron from UT Tyler. I think that's a great idea to provide the other. That provides the options for students, and in our fiduciary responsibility, it's serving the students through K through 12 as well as the institutions of Texas, not a third-party vendor. So I think that provides a way to do that effectively without showing favoritism for vendors.
Any other comments? David, Graham, is that an option for us to be able to do that? So what I'm hearing is we would have other, and then it would be an open-ended, free-form text box, and then it would be up to the institution of how they bring that in, correct? Did I interpret that correctly?
Yeah, it sounds like instead of, we'd have a checkbox with either an other or a free-form box where they could enter the name of the test, and then consistent with the other test data we collect, a date taken and a date sent to the institution.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessary for the student to put which test it is, just that it's other. It's not TOEFL and not IELTS. And the date. If you start free form, then it gets a lot more difficult.
Yeah, that's what I was. Okay. So can we add that as an option to talk about for the February meeting? Okay. Any other comments before we move on to the next item?
Just so it's captured in the notes appropriately, we're talking about adding an other and not a free form box, but adding other and then adding the same request of adding date taken and date sent. Is that what I'm understanding? Yes. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Just as another add-on, we would want to consider which application types we'd want to add this to.
Good point.
Yeah, and and David, correct me if I'm wrong, but some of the things, again, we talked about the items for consideration. We're in the process of discussing each item, and then at that point, you can kind of fairly prioritize, but until we hear from the tech team how much of a lift that will be, then you'll know a little bit better what that might look like. The other thing is what application type you want this to go on, and then is it a required or not required question? So those are things that we will walk you through, but I'm giving you a heads up that those are the discussion points too. Am I missing anything, David? Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Claudette. Okay, we're moving on to the item about proposal to extend the length of the field that collects the name of high school senior courses, and this was a suggestion from the ApplyTexas technical team and also requested by many applicants. Does anyone oppose to moving forward with this? Okay, I see some head shaking in the room, so unless somebody on the phone opposes, we're going to add that to the list for consideration. Moving on to the next item, a proposal to include relevant questions about selective service registration, and this was a proposal by the University of Texas at Austin, and David provided some justification for that in his review. Do we have any comments about that, or we'll start there. Does anyone have any additional comments or questions for that particular item? Does anybody oppose moving forward with that? Again, for items for consideration, we're not voting yes or no, but as Claudette mentioned, this is just keeping it on the list, basically.
Hi, this is David Barron from UT Tyler. So what we're talking about is really just a self-attestation. Obviously, the FAFSA would run a check against that registration, but we would not be doing that. We would just having the student self-attest if they did register. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So we're going to, for state funding, since that's the requirement, are we saying as long as they self-attest, we're going to use that and be okay in an audit if they lie?
Yeah.
So, I don't know. This was from UT Austin, so I don't know, Miguel, if you might have any additional insight for this request. If not, we can simply just say we need more information. So either way.
Yeah, Claudette. So Miguel Bacheles, UT Austin. I didn't actually submit this request, so I think that we should probably get a little bit more information from the requester.
Thank you, Miguel.
I would just be concerned about the efficacy of that if we're still held liable if we're using that information if they in fact did not register.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense to question that. I mean, there's simply just because we feel like it may be sufficient doesn't mean that it actually is.
And just so you know, this change has not occurred and won't, from my knowledge, and I'm not in financial aid, but I've been working to develop the TASFA, the online TASFA. That's another thing that's in my portfolio of projects, but we work very closely with the ApplyTexas team because in policy, we're supposed to include the TASFA in, integrated into the ApplyTexas system. So that's our role. And in that discussion, I know that this item has not changed, and I don't know that it'll change this next application cycle either. So all that to say, we might have a little more time for this particular piece, but I can follow up with our internal student financial aid programs group to find out if that's still the case. But they've told me that, yes, this is going to happen, but it's not anytime soon. And it's still a state requirement for our those that submit TASFA. So it's still a state requirement, but we can talk more through that too. I just wanted to add that additional information.
Yeah, hi, this is David Barron from UT Tyler again, and you are absolutely correct. I'm an old financial aid guy. But the change would be for 23-24 FAFSA. Right now, it is included on the current FAFSA and will not be eliminated, but is not considered in federal aid. So you're right, we do have that information for this current cycle.
Thank you. Thanks for adding that additional information. So hearing that, we will move on to the next item, and this was, and I don't remember who made the comment about potentially combining a proposal to add a second optional deadline for graduate majors proposed by UT Permian Basin with the proposal to add additional items terms to the ApplyTexas application. And I know Andreas had some questions about that as well. So I do think at this point we probably want to move forward, but does it sound like we need additional information, I think? Not to put you on the spot, Andres, but.
Andres, I don't know, with St. Philip's College. Again, I just, from the requester, wanted some more clarity on specifics of the terms and how that would affect, or the thought, how that would affect institutions, specifically representing community colleges.
So Claudette, could you reach out to both UTPB and Trinity Valley.
Yes, and I'll probably work with you, David, because I know those requests came in through them, and we'll just have to circle back. But yes, we can do that.
Okay, so we'll table that till the next meeting for additional information, both of those items. Moving on to the proposal to extend the maximum length of major titles, currently set at 60 characters, and this was proposed by Dallas Baptist University. Is there anyone, any comments, or is anyone in opposition of keeping this on the list for items for consideration? Okay. Okay, hearing no comments, we'll keep that on the list. Let's see, we are, the item consideration for making the gender question on the profile required. Michael Talamantes from University of Texas at El Paso is going to submit an official request for that for our next meeting, for the February meeting, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you, Michael. Moving on to the next item, consideration for making the international application representative address collection fields consistent with the rest of the address fields on the application. Currently, they are just 2 free-form text inputs to collect address, city, county, and zip, and that was a suggestion from the ApplyTexas technical team. Any comments or opposition to keeping that on the list? Okay, hearing no comments, we'll keep that on the list for consideration. We are now on the next item, consideration for expanding address verification to additional address fields. Currently, only permanent and physical addresses are passed through the verification. That was also a suggestion from the ApplyTexas technical team, and also Michelle Walker from Texas A&M University added that she would be submitting an official request to extend address verification through parent request. I believe that was, Michelle, correct me if I'm wrong.
That's correct. I asked specifically for the parent addresses, but if there are other addresses, I'm not opposed to putting those through either.
Michael Sanders, University of North Texas. Is there a reason why we wouldn't want to validate all address fields?
No, that's why I brought it forward. I don't recall the history of why we only did those 2. I don't remember why we did that, if it was a cost consideration with the validator we were using, or we just wanted to start and then just never continued. But yes, I think it would be a great idea to do that to all address fields.
Anyone oppose to keeping that on the list for consideration?
Ms. Hansard, are we at a place to make a motion? Or are we just considering it to stay on?
Great question, Amy. So at this point right now, all we're doing is just making a list of the items for consideration. And so there'll be items that the technical team will go back and revisit to determine the lift, so to speak. Or there will be items that we are requesting additional information, and Claudette will either go back to the requester or work with the technical team to provide additional information. When we meet in February, we'll have an updated list based on the conversation that we've had today. We'll review each item. The technical team will provide additional information. They will provide basically what's the time allotment that would be needed. Claudette will provide additional information on the items that we've requested additional information, and at that point we will vote, and that's where we'll determine. That's where we'll ask for motions for that. Thank you for asking that, Amy. I know that I remember my first time serving on ApplyTexas, and I was a bit lost, I think, the first meeting. So we appreciate all of the questions. Okay, let's see. We already talked about we're forming a subcommittee to discuss Texas residency, so we'll again move that off. And so now we're down to the question, consideration for creation of scholarship associated custom questions. Currently, schools can establish a link between the applicant selected university and major specific scholarships and associated essay requirements. And this was a suggestion from the ApplyTexas technical team. So are there additional questions about the scholarship associated custom questions? And I know that I have one. David, currently, how many universities are using the scholarship application?
I believe there are only 2 that are using the scholarship application currently.
Okay. So I think just thinking through the items, I think one of the concerns I would have about moving forward this is if we have, what's the total number of users using ApplyTexas at this point, institutions?
137, I think.
So if we only have 2 using the scholarship application out of 137, is this something where the technical team we would want to devote time to? And again, maybe that comes up when we determine what the lift is, but I would just express concerns about that. Other comments?
Hi, this is David from UT Tyler, one of the 2 schools using the scholarship app. So for us, it's important, but I understand the scope. We're still dealing with some bugs that moved when we moved over to AWS intermittently, where students can't go back and complete the scholarship application. So I think we're still dealing with some issues on those as well. So I would prefer that the technical team work on the bugs than adding more questions, in my preference.
And who's the other user? I think it's Michelle. Is it Texas A&M University?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, it's Texas A&M, and we're fine with whatever's decided. I mean, I haven't heard any requests for changes, per se.
So I'm looking to David and Graham. If the 2 institutions aren't interested, can we remove that from the list? Okay. All right.
But you all will be working on the bugs for those 2. Okay, I just wanted to make that clear. All right.
Yes, this is Graham. For the record, yes.
Thank you. Top of all the other things. Thank you, Graham and David.
Okay, at this point, we've gone through the list. Were there any items? I don't believe that we missed any items, but if we did, please. Would it be helpful to go through this one time and just say these are for sure the items? I just want to make sure for the notes. Okay. So from my recollection and my notes, or actually, Claudette, I'm going to ask you because you took excellent notes. So would you do that?
I tried, but I will, and let me know if I'm missing anything, Jamie. So the first is the proposal to add grade received. That all I put is action as additional research is needed. So that's going to come back. Proposal to add a question if the applicant enters a cell phone number. The action is yes, and again for consideration, but need additional information is needed. The next one is proposal to add fields to collect Pearson test. The action is for yes to consider, discuss adding an other option, and then the other information like date taken and date sent. The next one is proposal yes for consideration, and there was no discussion on that one. It's just yes, we want to keep that on the list, and that was on the high school senior courses. A proposal for the relevant questions about selective service. The action there is yes for consideration. Additional information is needed. The next one is a proposal to add a second optional deadline for graduate majors. This one is, as Andres mentioned, more additional information is needed, and that myself and David will seek additional information from the requesters for this one and the next item. Not the next item, the other item that is a proposal to add additional terms. So we needed more information about the terms is what was captured there. Did I get that correct? Okay. The next one is before that, which is a proposal to extend the maximum length of major titles, currently set at 60 characters. That one, yes, for consideration for next cycle. There was no discussion on that one. Let's see. Then the next, consideration for making the gender question on the profile required. This was still considered because it's, remember I told you it's either yes or no if it's required. That is still for consideration, but we did have an interest from Michael to submit a formal request of some other changes for that as well, so we'll expect that from Michael. The next one is consideration for making the international application representative address collection fields consistent with the rest of the address fields on the application. That one is yes, consider for next cycle. Consideration of expanding address verification, and I put to all addresses. Did I capture that correctly? Michael, yes. So then yes, there's a consideration for that, but for considering for all addresses. The next one is consideration for the formation of the subcommittee. We talked about that, and Amy's going to lead that subcommittee. And then the final one would be consideration for creation of a scholarship associated with associated custom questions. And that was decided that the UT ApplyTexas team will work with those two institutions directly. Well, sorry. Oh, yeah, we're not moving forward. Sorry, yes. I did not put that, I'm gonna put that now. Not considering for the committee, but the UT ApplyTexas team will work directly with the two institutions that currently utilize the scholarship application. Everything sound right?
Yes, thank you, Claudette. I think you captured it accurately. All right, any other comments about that before we move on to the next agenda item 10?
If there, all right, no questions, we can go ahead and move on. Agenda item 10 is a discussion of potential agenda items for the next meeting date. Thank all of you for meeting today, and I'd like to open it up to ask the committee for any potential items for the next meeting. Is there anyone on the phone?
Yes, and this may actually just be a request rather than an agenda item, but I think with the old ApplyTexas, we had access to the live environment, and with the Go ApplyTexas, we don't currently have access. Is that scheduled to come out, or is that something that we need to do as a request to get live access to?
Yes, it's scheduled to come out.
Okay, is there a time frame on that?
Not currently.
David Ingram, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think it would potentially be helpful at the February meeting if we could, maybe if you could prepare a roadmap with just a bit of information of these are the things that are on the horizon. I think it would be helpful to us as users, kind of knowing, so we're, you know, as we move into February, we'll be close to wrapping up really this application cycle, and as we start to think about and vote on the items that we just discussed today and then any additional items that'll come in, I think it would be very helpful for this committee to have an idea of what you already have on the roadmap and taking that into consideration when we vote.
Yeah, Jamie, this is Graham. I fully agree, and we'll have that in February. Between now and then, of course, the primary focus is on stabilization and bug fixing. By then, we'll be in a new phase.
Wonderful, thank you.
This is Jennifer Beal. I have one question, Graham. Is the fixing of the quick and easy part of the bug fixing, or is that a separate? Would that be a separate thing?
That is part of the bug fixing.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, are there any others? Okay, for agenda items for the next meeting, we do want to have a roadmap to items that are on the horizon for the ApplyTexas application. Okay, we have that noted. All right. The committee and coordinating board strives to coordinate meetings as early as possible. The committee is required to meet 2 times a year. However, depending on the need, the committee has met 3 to 4 times a year. Would the committee like to discuss potential meeting dates for the rest of the year?
Yes, I would.
Okay. All right, we can open it up.
Just to give you all new to the committee, we try to look as far ahead to map out the 3 to 4 meetings so that you have it on your calendars. What we do, these are not definitive dates until we send that notification out, but we like to get an idea from you all what's off, like what dates are off the table, because everyone has different schedules. So for this purpose, it's just to get somewhat of a good idea of when you want to meet for the next 2 to 3 meetings, depending on what your workload requires of you.
Do we know the dates in February/April when this room is available already? Or Deanna, could you help us with that?
And I'll say that for those on the broadcast. Did you capture all? Okay, I'm going to read your notes. So February, right now the dates for February are 1st and 2nd, 7th through the 11th, 14th through the 18th, and the 23rd through the 25th. Now, I don't know what days those are and what days you prefer. So this committee used to like meeting on Mondays. For whatever reason, I think it gave more time for travel, but you all are a different committee, so whatever days you want to choose of the week you want to choose. It's also available the 28th. And we have February 28th also available.
What about February the 7th? No, 8th, February the 8th. Was that one of the days? This is Chantel.
Yes, 7th through the 11th was the date, so February 8th. What day is that?
I believe SACRO is going on.
Yeah, it conflicts with the.
I don't know who's attending, but
I will not be available. I will be attending SACRO on that date.
So I would say, would it behoove us to try to see if we could schedule it around the biweekly ApplyTexas meeting that the technical team has, so that the people that are outside of the committee, I know some of them had tried to get on today and they couldn't do it at the same time. Like, should we offset, do it when that's not happening? Because that's on the 7th, or the 8th, I'm sorry.
You're referring to the calls, the stand-up calls we have for the technical team. Yes, we can take that in consideration. I would hope that we're not meeting in those calls all the way to February, but because we've been playing it by ear. For those of you who are unfamiliar or have not been on those calls, we meet about 30. We provide about 30 minutes of time. It was every day for about a month that we met. The technical team provided an update and had an opportunity for all of the administrative users to ask questions of the team and questions of each other. Those meetings get kind of quiet, and so we want to make sure that we're making sure to be respectful of everyone's time. So they're kind of dying down a little bit too, but we do have a healthy amount of people come on. We have about 40 average. It's pretty consistent, like 39, 40 that come on every time. So we still see the value in those, but I'm not sure that we'll be continuing them at that point. And we will kind of play that by ear, but we will consider that alternating, because right now it is just Tuesdays and Fridays. It may just move to one time a week or once every other week. So we'll consider that for sure. Yeah, so really what you're looking at is what day, because if you're planning to travel, what day is appropriate for you. The other thing is, you see we're pretty fairly done by noon. We start at 9. We do not have to be here all day. We're not you all are not obligated to be here all day. It's just how much time it takes, and this meeting went very efficiently. So, but just those considerations. If you are not comfortable at this time to make a decision, Deanna does a great job of putting together doodle polls, and we can send that to the committee for consideration as well. So if you don't want to decide now, we can do that also.
Graham and David, I have a question. Would it be beneficial to meet earlier in the month or later in the month? I'm just thinking about where you'll be in providing the best update to the ApplyTexas Advisory Committee. Is there a preference?
Earlier in the month would be better, but we
Okay.
can work with whatever.
So I think we have everybody here, and we have a really large contingency, and I don't think in all of the years that I've served on ApplyTexas, we've ever had almost the whole month open. So it's a little shocking. So I think if we could secure it, at least that February date, I would recommend that we move forward with that. And knowing, that the 1st and the 2nd are available now, could we possibly look at those 2 dates? Okay.
Any different, the 2nd, please?
Okay.
This is David at UT Tyler. I'm good with either of those days, 1st or 2nd.
On the 1st, we have there's another committee of us with Texas colleges that use Ellucian. So we meet on Tuesdays at 10:30, so.
Okay.
That's what.
So the 2nd is there, how about maybe, Deanna, you did say that date is open, correct? Oh, you're not available. Well, that's an issue here. Okay.
We can meet that day, that's fine.
Okay. So I would ask then, is there's anybody that opposes the 2nd? If there's anyone that could not be available on the 2nd?
Okay, well, I think the 2nd is our date. Okay. All right, thank you so much. And I do think we have made it to agenda item number 11, which is the adjournment. This concludes the business of the ApplyTexas Advisory Committee for October 26, 2021. If there is no further discussion, do I have a motion for adjournment?
Motion. Andres Arredondo with St. Philip's, motion to adjourn.
Okay. Do I have a second?
I'll second. Amy Williams.
All right. I have a motion made by Andres Arredondo. And I have a second made by Amy Williams. Members, please say aye. Members, please say aye. Those who oppose, say no.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
The motion.
Aye.
All right. The motion passes, and the meeting is adjourned, and the time is 11:44 a.m. Thank you.
Thank y'all.